25 years ago this week, on August 18th, 1996, Summerslam came to the Gund Arena in Cleveland, Ohio. The definition of a two-match show. We had a Bikini Beach blast-off on the free-for-all pre-show, which included T.L. Hopper, the wrestling plumber, jumping in the pool where Jerry Lawler was lounging out to fetch what at first appeared to be a giant turd. It looked like somebody took a dump in the pool. That's what they wanted you to believe. But upon further inspection, as T.L. Hopper swam down and picked it up with his bare hand, he found that it was just a Baby Ruth, which he began eating. Also on the free-for-all, on the same show where they did this segment, they gave us Stone Cold Steve Austin, your King of the Ring that year, against Yokozuna. Remember the King of the Ring? Austin 316. Everyone said, it's the speech that made him an instant sensation. Yeah, it made him such an instant sensation that he wrestled a 2-minute match against Yokozuna on the pre-show. I said, what made Austin was the feud with Bret Hart later that year. That is what got Austin on his path. It was not only the speech at the King of the Ring. The speech without what followed later that year doesn't get Austin anywhere. But this match here only ended when Yokozuna, due to his enormous girth, broke the top rope and fell backwards, and he was pinned by Austin. We had Psycho Sid defeating the British Bulldog in a match originally advertised locally as the Ultimate Warrior taking on the Bulldog. This was before Warrior was suspended and left the company. Sid was brought in to take his place in July, and he ended up parlaying that into a WWF title win just a few months later. Sid was super over during this period. You go back and you watch Sid and hit the reactions to Sid, probably starting around September, but definitely October into November. This guy was just super over. Ahmed Johnson was to have defended his Intercontinental title against Farouk on this show, but he missed the show with a very serious kidney injury that landed him in intensive care and required emergency surgery to stop his kidney from bleeding. This was all because of just a brutal kick that Farouk gave him on TV. Might have been, actually, it was the night that Farouk debuted, when he ran out wearing that ridiculous gladiator costume. He ran out there and he just field kicked him right in the kidney. And he really fucked up Ahmed pretty good. Meanwhile, he wound up having to vacate the championship not long after this. He couldn't come back right away. That's how bad the injury was. Jerry Lawler beat Jake the Snake Roberts in a match that Jake absolutely hated. This was during his born-again phase, but he was still very much struggling with his demons. Lawler would mock him on TV for it, and he would tempt him with bottles of booze, and here in this match at the very end, he forced what was supposedly bourbon down Jake's throat, which I think Jake has claimed was real liquor and it burned. Bruce Pritchard and Jerry Lawler both say that it was not actual bourbon. They said that it was iced tea. Mankind beat The Undertaker in the very first Boiler Room Brawl, which I really enjoyed. They started in the boiler room of the arena with the object being to get to the ring first. So you got to go from the boiler room to the ring. Inside the ring, you will retrieve the urn that Paul Bearer was holding. And this was before the days of giant Titantron, so they wheeled these little TVs out into the crowd on TV stands so that the fans could watch along. All of the boiler room stuff was taped the day before. Undertaker suffered a very bad staph infection in his elbow during this match. Foley hurt his back on the ladder spot where Undertaker pulled him backwards and tipped the ladder over that he was standing on, and he fell backwards onto, I think, a bunch of cardboard and beams and other stuff. He messed up his sciatic nerve on that spot. But Mankind would go on to win the match when Paul Bearer betrayed The Undertaker, ending a nearly 6-year alliance. And Shawn Michaels retained his WWE Championship against Vader in a main event that was restarted twice, with Vader first winning by countout and then by disqualification. Both times Jim Cornette said no, because he knew the title cannot change hands on a countout or a DQ. He wanted a definitive winner. So even though Shawn Michaels technically lost twice here, they restarted the match. Ultimately, Michaels did pin Vader to retain the title. This was Shawn Michaels at his in-ring best in 96 and 90, especially 97. Nobody could touch him. By 97, nobody could touch this guy in the ring. But it was also the peak of his being a complete prick and acting like a man-child, and that was on display here. He was visibly upset with Vader throughout the entire match, famously pitched a fit in the ring when Vader screwed up a spot where he was supposed to roll out of the way of a Michaels move off the top rope. Michaels would land on his feet instead. Shawn did land on his feet, but Vader didn't roll out of the way, so it just looked awkward with Shawn just standing there. So he loudly yelled, "Move!" and stomped on his head so hard. He stomped on this fucking guy's head so hard. And then he cussed him out. I mean, my God. If Vader wanted to, he could have killed this fucker for that. But as it was, Michaels had already threatened his job, and Vader was just too paranoid to do anything about it. There had already been an incident at a house show in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where Vader was laying in, his classic Vader blows in the corner. And Michaels starts, he grabs, I think, a headlock or something, and he starts having a conversation with him in the ring. And as Jim Cornette tells the story, Vader loses the match, of course, and he rolls out of the ring, and he is in tears. When he gets to the back, he is in tears. This big tough guy has been reduced to a pile of tears, and when Cornette asked him what happened, Vader said that Michaels told him that if he yanks his hair that way again, he's going to get him fired. I still think this match here at SummerSlam was a good match, but, that's just how Michaels was back then. He was a diva. He was all pilled up a lot of the time. This is well documented. But there was nobody better in the ring, so he could get away with it because he was that good. And Vince McMahon didn't want him walking in over to WCW and joining his friends. He definitely didn't want that. So he was able to get away with a lot of shit that normally people would not be allowed to get away with. You wouldn't be allowed to get away with that today. Coming out of this, Michaels did not want to work with Vader anymore, which derailed plans for a rematch at Survivor Series. I mean, those plans were probably already abandoned before this show because Michaels beat him clean. I mean, there was no debate whatsoever about this. Unless the storyline was going to be that Vader felt he deserved a rematch because he had already, won the match twice. I guess they could have played that up if they wanted to. But Vader was to have gone on to Madison Square Garden at the Survivor Series and win the championship, but Sid got the spot instead. I did think it was very strange how they named the In Your House pay-per-view that December. It's Time. Remember they gave the subtitles to all the In Your House shows? That one was called It's Time, which was a play off of It's Vader Time and his theme music. So not only did he not get the championship, he didn't even wrestle on that show. He didn't even wrestle on that In Your House show. But I believe it. I believe the original plan probably was for him to win the belt at the Garden. Jim Ross just talked about the Vader and Michaels stuff on his Grilling JR podcast the other day. He goes, there was another issue with Michaels having, problems with Vader. And this I can at least understand. Vader never washed his gear until he went home. This is what JR said about it. Hat tip to 411 Mania for the transcription. Shawn explained to Vince why he did not want to work with Leon. I remember one time I had to chew Leon's ass out because he didn't take it seriously that you've got to wash your fucking gear. You can let your sweaty gear sit in your travel bag between bookings. When the loop is over, you go home and wash your stuff. Leon had a propensity to leave his stuff in his bag. I had a phone conversation about him with that one time, and I learned from it because he put me on speakerphone. I chewed his ass out with his wife listening, and she ironically agreed with everything I said. Shawn got in my face, so to speak, and said I'm not going to work with him whether you book it or not because he won't wash his gear and it stinks, and then I get that stink all over me. All that shit was necessary. You've got an athletic monster heel with universal name identity, but because one guy got his feelings hurt or he was too stiff, he talks about how Leon was a good signing. Had he slowed down a little bit, yes, but he had lost some weight. He was trying to get in decent shape. Sometimes when you're big like that and gassed, you can be a little stiff inadvertently. I'm going to talk to Vince. That was Shawn's go-to, he says. I'm going to talk to Vince. It was just so unfortunate, childish, unprofessional, and should never have happened. I'm glad over the course of time that Shawn has changed and he is not that overbearing guy that was always seemingly at the center of controversy. I'm glad he has changed for the better. Leon missed out on the title, and Sid was seemingly, for Shawn anyway, less of an evil. 22 years ago this week, on August 22nd, 1999, Summerslam came to the Target Center in Minneapolis, the state being governed at the time by Jesse the Body Ventura, who had shocked the world 1 year earlier by winning the gubernatorial race in Minnesota. WWE reached out to him to see if he might be interested in appearing on the show as a guest referee for the main event, and surprisingly, he was, even after suing the company years earlier and winning. The appearances that he made on TV in the weeks leading up to the show were his first in 9 years, although he did later on cop to having an ulterior motive for taking the gig in a shoot interview that he did in 2012. I believe it may have been the RF video one that he did. He admitted one of the reasons he came back was to stick it to Hulk Hogan and Eric Bischoff. He said Bischoff had backstabbed him after Hogan signed with WCW in 1994, and they had subsequently fired Ventura. And his issue with Hogan has been documented in this very segment before. Vince McMahon admitted under oath in a deposition that Hogan was the one who ratted Jesse out when he tried to get the WWF roster, the locker room, to unionize in 1986, right before WrestleMania 2. Al Snow and the Big Boss Man took their hardcore title match outside the Target Center, across the street to a local bar, or a nightclub, whichever it was, called Blues Alley, which has since been closed. I was curious. I went on Yelp just to see if that place was still open, and apparently it's not. I loved it when they would leave the building and do stuff like this. I always thought it was fun. Ken Shamrock beat Steve Blackman in a Lion's Den weapons match. In the show-stealing match of the night, this is one of my favorite SummerSlam matches of all time. Test beat Shane McMahon in a Love Her or Leave Her match, where if Test won, he would be able to ask Shane's sister Stephanie out on a date. This match was much better than it had any right to be, given the experience level of the people involved, especially Shane. Pete Gass, 1/3 of the Mean Street Posse, said that the Posse, Shane, and Test all met for a good 3 days before this show to go over the match, so Shane could memorize all of his spots. He basically pulled a Macho Man at WrestleMania 3, and it paid off. WWE was also trying to get Billy Gunn over at this time as something. He won the King of the Ring tournament, and they booked him to wrestle The Rock on this show in a Kiss My Ass match that ended with Rock rubbing Gunn's face in some large woman's ass that Gunn had brought to the ring with him. Rock was said to not be happy about working with Billy, and let's be honest, it was beneath him, even back then. Even The Rock, long before he became as big of a star as he is today, it was beneath The Rock to be wrestling Billy Gunn in a major match at SummerSlam. And Mankind pinned Steve Austin in a triple threat match with Jesse Ventura as the guest referee to win the WWE Championship for the third time and the final time of his career. Kind of a shock finish here. I was not expecting Mankind to walk out with the belt that night. It did give the Governor, though, a chance to raise the hand of one of the babyfaces. There have been a lot of stories over the years that Austin, didn't want to do the job for Triple H. He didn't think he was ready. But Austin did the job for him just 2 months later in a singles match on pay-per-view. So they may have just wanted to guard against Jesse being booed and not give people the obvious finish, which would have been Triple H winning. Or Austin winning, I guess. Either way. There was a funny spot in this match where Austin got tangled upside down in the ropes and he couldn't free himself. He was yelling for Jesse to come over and help free him, and Jesse didn't hear him. So Triple H had to come over and help Austin out of the ropes. Triple H did win his first WWF title off of Mankind on Raw the very next night, which was also Lillian Garcia's first night as the new ring announcer in WWE. 20 years ago this week, on August 19th, 2001, SummerSlam was in San Jose with a series of WWF against the Alliance members. This was during the Invasion period, featuring a really fun ladder match with Rob Van Dam beating Jeff Hardy to win the Hardcore Championship. Stone Cold Steve Austin retaining the WWF title against Kurt Angle, despite Angle winning by disqualification. Austin has called this his proudest match as a heel. They were having a great match, but that finish was just a total groaner. And The Rock pinned Booker T to win the WCW Championship, the best part of which was the APA. I love this spot so much. The APA, Bradshaw and Farouk, they had had enough of Shane McMahon sticking his nose in this match. So they run down to the ring to go after Shane. Shane sees them coming and he starts sprinting around the ring. And as he is rounding the bend to get away from Farouk, he does not see that on the other side of the ring, Bradshaw is lying in wait. And as Shane comes around the bend, Bradshaw absolutely murdered him with a clothesline from hell. This was the best clothesline from hell I ever saw Bradshaw give. The fans popped huge for it, and it looked like he legitimately just killed this guy. 16 years ago this week, on August 21st, 2005, it was Icon versus Icon at Summerslam with Hulk Hogan against Shawn Michaels. The two had been partners on TV when Michaels super kicked Hogan and turned heel on Monday Night Raw. Sadly, it was not a very long heel turn because Shawn was back to his old self the night after this pay-per-view, but for the few weeks that it lasted, it was nice to see heel HBK again. The in-ring promo he gave 6 days before this on Raw in Montreal is one of the best of all time. The heat that he got that night was just off the charts. There was also the Larry King spoof where Michaels dressed up as Hogan and mocked him for being old. Hogan was not amused by any of these segments and felt that Shawn had gone too far. Michaels claims that he got permission from both Hogan and Vince McMahon to say what he was saying, but then Hogan would turn around and go behind his back to management and complain and whine and cry about it. The original plan here was for these two guys to do a 3-match series with Michaels winning one, Hogan winning one. Hogan probably would have won the last one too. But Hogan decided against it. He insisted that he go over at SummerSlam. That don't work for me, brother. Here's how we're going to do it. He out-politicked the politician. Shawn Michaels should have known better than to try that. What do they say? You come at the king, you best not miss? Hogan claims that Shawn's lack of professionalism is what caused him to back out of doing the other 2 matches. I don't know what unprofessionalism he could possibly be talking about. I mean, Michaels only flopped around like a fish out of water the entire match. His overselling of Hogan's offense was comical. It came across like a tantrum by somebody who knew that he was losing and wasn't getting his win back. And he admits now that it was not a very professional way to go about handling things, but the match was a rousing success at the box office. It was the second most bought SummerSlam pay-per-view of all time, behind only the Highway to Hell show in '98, and I think it was only about 50,000 buys less than that. I think it was about 650,000 buys for this show, I believe. Rey Mysterio defeated Eddie Guerrero in a ladder match for custody of Rey's son, Dominic. Mysterio has called this his favorite match from his WWE run. Eddie's wife, Vicky, was supposed to run in and push the ladder over at one point with Eddie on it, disgusted with his behavior. And eventually she did. She did do the spot, but she was sent out very late to the ring, which led to Eddie getting very vocally upset and shouting, "Where the fuck is Vicky?" Oh, I remember that. He was not happy. We saw some of that Latino heat coming out in that match. John Cena beat Chris Jericho to retain the WWE Championship in a match that Jericho personally requested. He wanted to put Cena over on his way out. He even extended his contract by a month to do the match at SummerSlam, and then he put him over again on Raw the next night in a "you're fired" match before leaving the company. Jericho was completely burned out. He just wanted to just step away. And he did, and he would not come back until November of 2007, the same month that I recorded the very first episode of this podcast. This was also the show where Muhammad Hassan was originally being groomed for a World Heavyweight title match against Batista in Batista's hometown of Washington, D.C. You talk about the perfect setup, that whole Muhammad Hassan gimmick, not only beating Batista in his hometown, but his hometown happening to be the capital, Washington, D.C. I could see why they would have wanted to not only do the match, but possibly do the title change on that show. Now, he would have beaten The Undertaker at the Great American Bash in July, and there's a very good chance he would have gone on to win the championship. I don't think they would have decided. Those decisions about who's going to win are usually not made. I mean, sometimes they're made the day of, but probably at least the week of. I think even Bruce Pritchard has said that, yes, they were going to do Hassan and Batista, but no, they had not yet confirmed that they would have done the title change. But yes, it is very likely that they would have. But the London bombings happened. On the very same day that they aired a taped angle on SmackDown the month before this, with Hassan leading a bunch of men dressed up as terrorists to attack The Undertaker, and UPN Network, which aired SmackDown at the time, said, "We don't want this guy on our network anymore. We don't want this character on our television show." And that was the last that we saw of Muhammad Hassan.